what's up guys? It's CovertCode here, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be teaching you guys how to design GUIs on Roblox. So the first thing is, what are GUIs? So I'll bring up some examples on the screen now, but essentially anything 2D mostly in your favorite games are GUIs. So imagine you join Adopt.me or your favorite game and a daily login reward GUI comes up. It's like asking you to, confirm, get your reward, and it also shows you your streak. That's a GUI. Imagine you have a button on the screen to launch a nuke. That's also a GUI. Even if you have an inventory for your pets or something, that's also a GUI. So GUI stands for Graphic User Interface. And it's essentially a way of allowing players to interact with your game, hopefully easily. Now, one thing you should know is where to actually put GUIs. So make sure you can actually see the Explorer tab by going to View, Explorer over here. You should also, while we're at this, click Properties, Toolbox. You should also click Model and go to Insert Object. This is probably the most important part of this tutorial. Now that you can actually see most of my tabs, I would recommend clicking on Start a GUI, and that's the place where if you put something in there which is a GUI, the player will spawn with that GUI on their screen. So insert a screen GUI, that's essentially a container, okay, for any UI such as text, images, or anything you want in your GUI to appear. So this is the container for that. And make sure to actually place that underneath Starter GUI. So I'm just going to call this, Shop GUI. Okay, so the first thing I'm actually going to do is click on Shop GUI and double click on Frame. So search up Frame and double click on that. And all the frame is essentially a blank box, essentially. So click on the frame by going to Explorer and click on that. And as you can see, these sort of boxes actually pop up on the border of the frame. That means that you are in the UI editor mode, okay? And actually the screen up here also pops up. So I'm going to click, drag, and center this in the screen, okay? But the first thing you should actually know about designing GUIs is the size property. So the size on Roblox is split up into two different parts for GUIs. There's scale and offset. So right now it's set to offset. So just go to X, for example, okay? And the X size for this GUI is 100 in the offset. And if I just drag this like this, okay? Let's say I want this sort of squarish shape to pop up on the user screen. If I actually have different devices, it will not look the same because you're using offset. Offset uses pixels. So click on device up here, go to test device. And if you cycle through these devices, as you can see, the actual shape and position of the frame changes based on the amount of pixels or the resolution on the device. And that is why I always suggest whenever you see the size, set that to 0.1, 0, 0.1, 0. And that converts it to scale. And now if you resize this to something like this, it will always be in the same position and the exact same size relative to the player's screen. As you can see now, it's in the same spot, same size and everything, unlike offset. So let's actually, resize this to design our first UI. So I'm going to be designing a shop GUI for the purposes of this tutorial. So I think the size is about good. Just move this around until you get those sort of lines, I guess. So lines on the y-axis and the x-axis. That means that it is aligned and exactly in the center of the screen. For our shop GUI, I'm actually just going to make it blue. Or something like that. Yep. And I'm going to remove the border size pixel. Now, border size pixel essentially is, the border pixels, I guess, for the frame. And you can change the color of that, but I don't think we need this. I'm going to set this to 0 to remove that completely. Now, I'm going to be introducing you guys to something called UI Corner. And that allows the borders of frames and other objects to be rounded. Again, do not use offset. Let's set this to 0.25. That's too much in my opinion, 0.1, and essentially that's 10% of the corners rounded off. Okay, that's too much. Still, 0.05 is good enough for me. Okay, now let's copy this frame and paste it inside of Shop GUI. So copy and paste into, okay? And I'm going to resize this just a bit, and I'm going to create a sort of title, just like this. And the only issue at the moment is it's the same color and you're not going to be able to see the outline. So what we can do is insert something called UI stroke, and that adds a more reliable border in my opinion than border size pixel does. So I'm going to increase the thickness to something around those lines. Open up the color property, pick screen color, pick that color, and I'm just going to make it darker so it's not too contrasting but still creates a border. Then I'm going to clone this UI stroke by copying, and then I'm going to paste it inside of this frame. And now we have two distinct frames. But I'm actually going to resize this slightly to make it around that size. Find the center again by finding that line in the middle, and I'm going to place it up there. Now let's introduce you to the next thing, which is text. So while selecting the frame, insert a text label inside of that frame, and again, same thing, 0.10, convert to scale. And I'm just going to resize this because I want the text to actually be in the center of this frame. And I'm going to set the background transparency to 1. So essentially it's completely transparent besides the text. And let's see what these properties are. So text scale essentially scales the text up according to the device's resolution. So right now it's all the same size. As you can see, it doesn't scale up, but if we take that, it'll actually scale according to the resolution of the screen. And I'm just going to change the font by going to font, and I'm going to select Gotham Black. That's pretty good. And I'm going to change the text color to white. Okay. And this text stroke transparency property essentially adds a border around the text. And I'm just going to insert a border of 0.8 transparency. That looks good. And I'm just going to change the text to shop. Okay. Something you might be noticing at the moment though is the text is massive. Okay. If you have a small screen, the text is pretty big. So what we can do to limit that is create a UI text constraint inside of the text label and limit it to around 40 text size. That's too small. We can do 70. That's about the same as it was, but slightly better in my opinion. And now it's, you're using something new and it looks sharper. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is copy this frame, and actually I'm going to insert a text button. Okay, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a text button. When you click on this, something happens. However, you need to do that using scripting. So I'm going to set the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5. So it's anchored to the center of the screen. And I am actually going to change the background color tree to red. So something like this. And I will also remove the border size pixel, set that to 0. And set the text to X. Okay, I'm making a close button if you haven't realized by now. And I'm going to also set the font to Gotham Black. Make sure your fonts match because it usually looks bad if they don't. So text scaled once again, set that to white, and we have this close button. However, the issue is if we want a square, okay, just like this, it'll actually, well, usually what you would do is insert a UI text constraint. UI aspect ratio constraint. So UI aspect ratio constraint inside of the text button to give it a perfect squarish ratio, unless you can eyeball it, of course. So 1 is a square, 2 is a rectangle, 3 is an even, more extreme rectangle, 10 is this insanely extreme rectangle. So I'm going to set that to 1. And I'm also going to copy this UI corner and paste that in text button to give it a, rounded corners. But I'm actually going to change the corner radius here to 1. So it's now a circle. And here's where that text constraint comes in. So as you guys can see, the text is slightly too big for this UI. frame. So what we can do is copy this UI text constraint and paste that in text button and lower this number until it reaches your desired size. So as you guys can see now, it isn't too massive for the for the frame. So that's our close button right there. Let's copy this frame, paste it inside of itself, okay? And I am actually going to remove the UI stroke now and make this the exact same color as that, okay? And I'm going to position it around here. That looks okay. And I'm going to copy this, paste it again inside of the same parent and resize this so these lines align. As you guys can see, they're the same exact, position, I guess, position-wise, they're the exact same. And I'm going to resize it to that. And this shop is starting to come together now. So again, grab this frame, okay? And usually what you would do is actually name these. I'm going to name this details, for example. Always name your UI because it's going to be extremely hard to navigate otherwise, especially if you're scripting it. I'm going to call this items inside of details, okay? I'm going to paste itself, okay? So copy this and paste it inside of that. And I'm going to make this frame slightly darker, okay? And I'm going to insert a UI aspect ratio constraint to get a square. And I'm going to resize that to somewhere around there. That looks okay. And as you can imagine, this is where our image of the item will go. And I'm going to copy this text label, click on the details panel and paste that inside of that. And I'm going to rename this to image container. Okay, always name your stuff. Don't, like right now, I'm not naming enough things, but always name your stuff. And I'm going to center this, so it's essentially align it to this square. And I'm going to say item name. So this is where the item name would go, but it's slightly too big. So what can we do? Use UI text constraint once more and resize this to 35. And that looks better. Now, here's something you could do. Copy this text button, which is called exit. Okay, paste it inside of the details frame, and we're going to have a buy button. So change the UI, actually delete that, you don't need it. Change the UI corner to something like 0.2, okay? And drag this to the shape you want. In my case, I think something like this is good for a buy button. And I'm going to change the text to buy, okay? And normally these are green, so I'm just going to change the background color tree to green. Something like this, slightly brighter, there we go. Now we have a green buy button. I think we should also change the UI text stroke transparency for that to 0.8, there we go. And I'm actually going to copy this, which is the item name. And I'm going to paste it inside of details, okay? And this will be our little description. So I'm going to put this slightly up, just like this, resize, and description, okay? So I'm going to say item description goes here. This item is cool, okay? And that is too big, so shrink it down once more to like 25, even 23. And as you guys can see, we have our item name, the description, and a buy button. Now, there are two ways you can actually create an item image here, okay? So first way is the traditional image way. So insert an image label, and let me show you how these work. Set the background transparency to 1. I'll show you why in a second. Copy aspect ratio constraint to that, okay? And scale it up again to the size you want. In my case, it's something like this. And see the mistake I did there? I did not use scale. Here's what happens if you don't use scale. It doesn't align ever. And I actually didn't use scale for this button here too. So my bad. 0.10, 0.10. Again, just resize it again and you're fine. 0.1, 0.10. And there we go. It's fine now. And you can actually notice the difference. So this is the image, okay? And just go to Toolbox. So view Toolbox and go to images, and I'm just going to search up I don't know, Bloxicola, okay? And imagine my item looks like this, okay? So I'm going to right click, copy asset ID, click on the image, paste that inside of the image property, and just press enter. So that's our Bloxicola, okay? But if I set the background transparency to 0, that's what happens. If you want that, leave it, but I don't in my case. So that's the first way you can actually insert, an image. The second way is by using a viewport frame. Now, a viewport frame is essentially an image label, okay? But the image is in 2D. So you can actually place models, parts, and actually animate things within the viewport. However, that is slightly more advanced. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to stick with an image label. So the next and final section is this item area. So this is where you're actually going to be, scrolling through the items. You've got a list of items. So click on items, okay, and insert a scrolling frame. And a scrolling frame, essentially, if you just scroll with your mouse, that's literally all it is. It's a literal frame with a scrolling bar. That's a scrolling frame, okay? Set the size to 0.10, 0.10, scale this up, okay? And I'll just position it like this, okay? And now it looks ugly if it's got that white border, so I'm going to remove that. So just set the background transparency to 1. It also has this border size pixel, which we want to get rid of, so set that to 0. And we've got this UI, okay? That's our scrolling frame. Now, how do we actually add things inside of the scrolling frame? One of the easiest ways you can actually, add items in your scrolling frame is by copying this image, actually this image container, so this entire square and the image inside, okay? Copy that and paste it inside of the scrolling frame. And it doesn't look great at the moment, I know, it doesn't look amazing. So what I'm actually going to do is insert a UI grid layout, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It'll create a UI grid for you, okay? So if I copy and paste this a few times, you'll see what I mean. It will automatically order stuff within the scrolling frame, okay? Just like this. So the only issue we have at the moment is the images are too small. So there's a very easy way to fix this. Also, the images are using offset, so we don't want that. So click on the UI grid layout, go to cell size, set the X to 0.20, and set the Y to 0.20 as well, okay? And that creates a grid. It doesn't look amazing, I know. We can fix that though. Go to cell padding, set the Y to 0, 0, set the X to 0, 0, but we want some padding between the X, okay? So we'll add 5 pixels. Now, in this case, it's fine to use offset. As you guys can see, it doesn't look awful when you scale between different devices. So offset is fine here, just not for sizing. With regards to the grid looking like this, pretty bad in my opinion, it's because we have these these UI aspect ratio constraints inside of the actual images. So if we just put these inside of the grid instead, okay, notice how it'll behave differently. So keep pasting, okay, I'm going to copy these, paste. Notice how it looks tremendously better. So when using UI grids, always paste the aspect ratio constraint inside of the grid itself, not the actual items. So go to UI grid layout again, and we need some padding. So padding is a space between the images and all that, by the way. We need some padding on the y-axis. So I'm going to add 5 pixels again, and that looks great. Only thing we really need to fix is 2, 3. So it essentially we made these wider, okay? So it looks better slightly. And that's how to design UI. Now, there are a few other things which you can actually learn about. If you want this to have a gradient, for example, insert a UI gradient just like this, click on color, and you can actually modify this, to have a gradient just like this. Rotate it, for example, just like that. It doesn't look bad. I didn't need to use this. I think it looks better without a gradient. But if we paste this inside of one of the items, it might look better. It might not, but it's there just in case you want to learn about it. There are also different types of layouts. Okay, so there's grid layout, which we just used. There's a list layout, page layout, and table layout. Insert those and see how they behave differently. But essentially, this is how you design UI. Just keep on trying, don't give up, you know, keep practicing and make different UIs. And eventually you'll get there. This is pretty easy to, you know, design. You can follow along with this tutorial and try and design this. But yeah, that's all I had, guys, for this video. If you like, please leave a thumbs up, and if you have any suggestions about what videos I should make in the future, don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time.